Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo. Very, very excited to have back on the show Amelie and Marivain. Thanks so much for being on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we had a blast last time, and so one of the reasons I wanted to have you back is to kind of dive a bit deeper into a topic that a lot of people talk about, but I haven't seen much discourse on. So the topic is really around, what should I be focusing my efforts on? Building up my company LinkedIn page, or building up my individual employees individual profiles on LinkedIn. So I will be playing the advocate for the individual, and I would love if get your thoughts from a company perspective, and then we'll see we'll let people vote in terms of where they should be focusing their efforts. But we'll dive right into it. So we've talked about your kind of the growth you've had for your company's LinkedIn profile, so I'd love to find out a bit more about that.
Yeah, perfect. So Thunes on the LinkedIn platform has had a company profile for now about a year and a half. We started in February 2029, and right now we are about 14,000 followers, and we've done that growth all organically. Like, we haven't done any paid or sponsored content. So it's quite a good growth because we started at, I think, when I arrived at Thunes, 300, and then we've been very consistent with sharing updates and sharing content that would be relevant for people without sounding too salesy. And I believe it takes a while to get into a rhythm to share good content and to make sure that it is relevant from a global point of view as well. Because once you have the company page, how do you make sure it talks to everyone, whether they are in the US, here in Singapore, and in Europe? Because so far we haven't created sub-pages for the different regions or different markets. So in our case, we have decided to go for one single page so far, multi-language. So when we have something in Spanish, we would share it in Spanish. We might do a translation for English, but we share the content in the original or source language. Then we'll do the same for Mandarin, or the same for French. That's what we've been doing so far, and so far it's been pretty successful.
Awesome. Well, I think you mentioned some things that could definitely be applied to an individual's LinkedIn profile as well, in terms of consistency. I think that's the big thing I always talk about if you're trying to build your own kind of personal brand on LinkedIn. The other good point you made is around kind of around not being too salesy. So I think that's a big issue that I see with a lot of different company pages. And I think that's my big gripe is it looks very salesy. It looks like they're just pumping out either product, brochures, or it looks like a billboard essentially. It's not something that you would actually want to follow and actually find valuable. So I think that's my big pet peeve with the corporate ones, is that it sounds like they're just shouting about themselves and not really providing anything valuable to the conversation. Now, I'm not saying that's the case for you guys, but I see that across a lot of different company profiles. I guess one of my biggest challenges with company pages is the relatively low engagement. So you see company pages that get, 100,000, millions of followers, and, 2 people who engage with it.
Yeah. So, and I think that brings the point that you just mentioned, right? There's a very fine line between trying to be relevant, trying to self-promote, but bringing value to your audience, right? What is it that they can actually either interact with, engage with, read, and have some kind of insight around the industry. So it's about thought leadership, and in that sense is the same that you would do for your own individual profile in that sense.
Yeah,
right?
I think, absolutely. Like I said, I think some of the best company pages I've seen are those that resemble more of an individual profile versus a brand. So I think Netflix does a pretty good job of posing questions and starting dialogue, rather than just saying, hey, look, here's the new series we have coming out. Check it out, check it out, check it out, which most brands tend to do. So I think, for me, I would love to see more brands actually, taking best practices from individuals instead of trying to copy their peers, which are probably not doing a much better job than they are.
Yeah, it is the same as I feel like when you have a website, of course it's your window, right? It's your window shop. But at the same time, if you want people to come and come back and engage, you have to deliver something, right? And that's when a lot of people will tell you content is king there. And it is hard for for example, B2B financial services to be as engaging as a B2C a company, because doing polls or surveys, it becomes slightly more difficult because you're talking, you're talking to people, but you want to have valuable content for companies. So that becomes a challenge. And I feel when you are doing it on a personal level and an individual profile, it becomes easier to say, okay, I'm talking to professionals either in my industry or my own roles and or my own role and position, so it stays individual to individual and professional
Mm.
to professional, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's my big kind of case for individual ones, because at the end of the day, well, when you're B2B, you're buying from someone else. So I might be buying from Thunes or I might be buying from Microsoft, but at the end of the day, I'm buying from the individual, whether it's a salesperson or the execution team that's going to roll it out. So I think that's something that a lot of people forget when they're doing B2B is the individual element. And it goes a long way as a buyer. You're
Yeah.
looking, as the brand, yes, that's you're taking that box. Okay, is the brand trustworthy, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yes.
is the actual team I'm going to be working with, are they someone I have chemistry with? Are they credible sources themselves? So I think the
Yes.
same best practices that companies doing, um, I always advocate in terms of marketing and sales at the bare minimum, because those are the ones that could probably be having the first touch interaction with a lot of B2B clients.
Yeah, you're bringing a very, very good point, actually, because I think one of the first things we did as well at the beginning of the page was actually to give a kind of a how-to for all of the individuals to improve their profile. So as, the very basic 101, have a professional picture, have a summary of what you can do to help people, right? What is your expertise? What are you bringing to the table? So that when you reshare our post, or you want to add your own comments to that, people know exactly what you can bring for or what you can do for them, and vice versa. We've actually created some very simple asset with quotes from our salespeople saying what is it that they like to do for their customers. So whether it's, they like to talk about data, or they want to talk about, seamless payment, or what it is that, they really specialize in and they love to, or they're passionate about. So we're bringing the individual into the company page, and we're bringing the company into the individual as well.
See, that's what I like. I mean, that's where I spend a lot of my time doing in terms of training consulting, to make sure that people have those, they're articulating themselves in the best way. They're expressing their value, the company's value. But I love what you said as well about combining the two. I don't think enough brands really do that effectively. I think a lot of them are doing like the quotes. I see it's a very common thing now. I don't
Yeah.
see enough brands really leveraging the content that their employees are creating, whether it's a popular post or a popular article they wrote, and then republishing that. I don't
Yes.
really see enough brands doing that. I don't know why, because maybe they don't want to give too much credit to one. But I say, if someone's doing some great work, go ahead and highlight them on your company pages, because it gives them more incentive to put out more great content. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, you're completely right. And most of the time, for example, when uh, people from your company, they go to events, or they used to go to events, or they participate to online conference, and they usually share something, right? Like, oh, my insight about, or my key takeaways, right? And if you can share that or reshare that as a company, not only you show that, your people, get to have more learning, and get to meet with a lot of people, and improve basically their skill set, or whatever they were doing at this conference, but also it reflects highly on the company, having the time and the thought of, okay, we need our people to participate in those kind of conferences, and we want we want people to be out and basically learning, meeting with people, understanding what's happening in the industry, and then bringing their own value to the conference. And I feel what you just said is very, very important to ensure that all the small but very important assets that your team is creating, should be reposted and should be like fully utilized as a company.
Yeah, and I think you bring up another good point around kind of if someone attends an event and they share their learnings. This is where I've seen the big gap in terms of company versus individual. So the company tends to provide these very surface level, like, our CEO spoke at this event, it was great and whatever. But it's usually the person who go on the individual page and say, hey, I had a great time. Here's some of the things I talked about, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the reasons that if I'm, following a person, I will look at their individual page versus what the company put, because what the company tends to put is very generic. It's very high level. It's like, they did something great. It's like a press
Yeah.
release. But if you go to the individual where they're talking about their experience, it's for me far more valuable than going back to the companies and saying, hey, look, this person spoke, here's a nice photo, etc.
Sure. And at the same time, as the company, you need that generic content. And you know why? Also because then it brings out for all the individual or the employees to say, oh, that's very generic. Let me reshare that with my touch, with my own understanding, with what it means for either my prospect, my customers, or for the industry in general, right? So instead of also delivering a very sharp messages, then you give your employees, all of them, to be able to reshare and give their own take on that as well.
So yes, you make a very valid point, and I understand where you're coming from. I love it in theory. I think the biggest challenge, and I think this is another one of my big pet peeves, is employees just directly sharing a post without adding any insight. I see a ton doing that. They'll add a hashtag and they'll just add a hashtag and they'll share that as a post. Or it'll have no description and they'll just share the post. Or they'll have like a one-liner like, check out this event. That's all it said. So I think that is where I see, company to the individual going a bit wrong. And I see that a
Yeah.
lot more the senior executives, maybe who don't have enough time. I understand that. But for me, it's actually more detrimental as the audience to see like a feed of just, here's company news, here's company news. It's like, yeah, I can follow the company page if I want to get the company news. I follow you because I want your insights or your take or your experiences. So I think that is where I see the gap currently between what brands ideally think is happening and what is actually happening a lot of the times.
Yeah, I agree. It's true. I remember from one of my previous experiences, I saw one of my senior executives sharing a lot of content, not necessarily from the company, but in general on LinkedIn about work, about some of his own personal development article he was reading about, or about the industry in general. And I noticed a pattern. He was sharing without giving any more value or any more thought on it. And what I actually did is I reached out to him and I first congratulate him, because it's not easy to have the self-discipline to go on every day and share something. I don't do it. And so I think for a senior executive to do it is very important. And then I gave him a few basically easy to sentences add to any of the different things he was sharing. So whether it be according to the different focus he had when he was sharing, I helped him, and then we decided on, okay, let's focus on those 3, 4, 5 kind of topics, and then let's create basically stream of what you can share, and on top of that, now let's write for you, right? So let's make your own blog post. Since you're sharing already a lot, it won't take you much more time to actually put a text there, a nice picture, and it can be just a recap of the 4 or 5 articles you just read and you just share anyway, and say, these are my key takeaways. And so we've been doing that, but it takes time and it takes resources. At the end of the day, is how much resources can you dedicate to that, right? And that's when I think a lot of people now are saying, you as a person, you're a brand, your company is a brand, you need to be online, you need to be there 24/7, and you need to be posting as much as possible, relevant still, but as much as possible. And it takes time.
It does. It does. It's definitely a commitment. And I love that you went in and congratulated them first rather than saying, stop doing that. I think that's, I probably would have gone the other way around, but yes, it's very tactful of you. And I think it makes more sense because, like you said, if they're doing it already, like the behavior is there, it's just that the implementation is not quite there. And I think that's where I've seen a lot of brands kind of really struggle, is that time portion. So I think time is, at the end of the day, everyone has the same amount of time. We all have 24 hours a day. I think it's how much value do you place on doing it. And there's a way to become more efficient. I'm creating some courses myself on, how to create content effectively, how to do it in a time efficient manner, because it is one of those things that's valuable. But if you don't know how to do it effectively, you're going to be burning a lot of time. So I love that you went in there and helped him. I think there's another separate debate that I've seen some brands struggle with is ghostwriting versus getting the executive to write it themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been on both fronts. Yeah, but go ahead.
Firstly, to come back to what you say, I highly recommend taking a course on efficiency to write, or efficiency to just get things done. I think it's really important. So very good on you that you're sharing that. Ghostwriting versus the person writing. To be honest, I would say if the person with who you're working, you already know them pretty well, they can give you 3 or 4 topics for a structure blog they want, or a blog post they want to do. That should be more than enough to start with, and then slowly but surely you can also pass them on. Look how easy it was to give me 4 points. What don't you try next time to do the first paragraph, so I really follow your lead and do it. So you actually bring that element to their table once a week or once a month to start with. But it's also, as you said, and you pointed out, how much value do they see in that, because at the end of the day, not everyone likes to be in the spotlight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I do a lot of work across Asia, and I see that's definitely the case of people, there's that culture of being humble and humility and not wanting to put themselves out above everybody else. And I don't think it's the case. I think some people do that where it's obviously very braggadocious, and you can tell, but there's a lot of people who are local and they still provide a lot of value. I think one of my clients was very blunt with me. She's from the UK, and she was like, well, you have to do it because you have a small business. If you don't do it, then you don't have a brand. And I was like, fair enough. But you know what, whether people like it or not, a lot of people unfortunately have been laid off. And those who have good brands are generally able to bounce back pretty quickly. Those who have not created any content or not, had any presence online, they're struggling, and I feel for them, because I've been in that position before. So I think, whether you do it for your own selfish reasons or you do it to help the company, I think is really up to the individual, but I see it definitely helping both sides. I mean, I always see with the individual, helping them if they do get laid off, but also it has a residual effect. So for example, if I'm in marketing or sales, nowadays I check out specific companies because I saw so-and-so and I was like, oh, which company they work for? It looks pretty interesting based on their profile. So I'll actually they'll lead me. I rarely go to a company page now, unless I see someone and say, oh, well, what is it they do, or what is it the company does? And then I'll go and I'll say, oh, okay, that's quite interesting. So I actually go the opposite route. So individual to company versus company to individual.
No, yeah, I agree. I think you're bringing a very good point, because at the end of the day, it's the same as the domino effect, right? It's the same when you have your own team and you're you want them to shine first, because whatever they do will reflect, good on the manager, and hence reflect good on the company. So if on LinkedIn we extrapolate that to LinkedIn, that's the same. The more your employees shine and can be present on LinkedIn, actually they bring people to the company as well. So it's the same kind of principle, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think another thing when I want to circle back to is you were talking about you guys have one page, one company page, and you have multiple languages, and you're covering obviously markets around the world. This is another, once again, I'm going just pet peeves, my own personal pet peeves that I see is a lot of US, mostly US centric brands. And I can say this because I'm American. Um, they are very, if you look at the content stream, it's very American centric. So for example, if I am, a manufacturer in India or China and I'm reading it, it's like, okay, it's nice to find out, what the economy and what the things are like in the States, but what does that really have to do with me? So
Mm-hmm.
I find like a lot of Western headquartered companies really, really struggle with creating enough local content. A lot of times because they have larger teams and it's easier, like you said, they have the manpower to produce it. Usually they have some kind of history or they have more clients. So they're in a different phase versus a lot of Asian clients. So they may be in the awareness phase, or they may start, yeah, and then be on consistent maintaining that brand. They already have a large enough market share and things like that. Whereas, the Asian counterparts may be saying, we need to really build presence around this particular market because we don't have the kind of clients that the US has or Europe has. So I think that is where I see a struggle. I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of how do you prioritize that? Because it's one of those things I always hear, the regions, and then you get down to local markets. They're saying, oh, I want X many posts this month, and this I want this many things. So how do you get around that?
That's a very good question. So it's, for example, if we check individual markets, we've had a lot of requests to, for example, have, happy 4th of July, happy whatever else in another country.
Mm,
And at the moment you start doing that, then it's then really, really difficult, because if you are present or if you offer your services in more than 100 countries like Thunes does, then you have to do that for 100 countries.
yeah.
Because otherwise it's not, why would you do it for one and not the other? So I think part of what we've been doing now is we would create some very local related, for example, festivities or celebrations assets, but only give it to the sales related to that region and market, so they can use it on with their emails, or they can use it on their own individual LinkedIn page,
Mm,
but we won't put it on the company page. And when it comes to local content with a different language, so far the choice and the strategy has been to show that since we are a global company, we talk different languages. So when you come to our company page, which is a bit different than a website, which you could actually check, okay, I want to have this or that language.
mm-hmm.
Then our company page, you'll see the diversity of our people and the diversity of the languages we speak and where we are because of what we share. And that's where we've decided to go, to show this diversity directly by coming to our company page on LinkedIn. So you have different languages and you have different type of news and content, because that's who we are. And I think so far it works well. In the future, we might need to have sub-page for different languages, but so far it's been working well for us.
Yeah, I think you answered that as well as I could have imagined you answered. I think it's a beautiful answer. I love once again that you made the point around not everything has to be shared on social media. I think that's a lot of people forget that there are different channels besides social media. So you talked about email, whether it's a local in-person event or a webinar, like that's a good time to share that locally relevant stuff. It doesn't have to be flashed, or even like you said, it could be shared via the local teams, their individual. That would probably have a much bigger impact than, like you said, having 4th of July or Hari Raya on your company page, because you would have, a million different festivals you'd have to appeal to. So really saving, the content that is globally applicable. And I think that's where it's a tough one, because you want to make something that's globally applicable, but you don't want to make something that's so watered down and vanilla that
Yeah.
it's just doesn't have any teeth to it. And I don't know how you get around that one, because I imagine it's a tough one for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, I think you're bringing a good point, because it's it is a balance to try and find something that can be relevant for a lot of people just because it's in Spanish, right?
Mm.
So um, we have tried, to be honest, it was a trial and error as well. We've tried the different celebration and putting it out there, and sometimes I think last year we've tried a few Singaporean festivities. We're a Singaporean based company, so that's why but then we go back to, why would that matter to someone in Brazil, right, or someone in Kenya? And we are like, unless we bring something around that, and we say, for example, we're in Singaporean company, we're going to be celebrating this today because of this and that reason, and then it becomes more a cultural thing we share, which I'm not sure how relevant that would be. But if you are B2C, that might be interesting for people to say, hey, this is how we do things in that country where we're based, where our HQ is, right? But in general, we have chosen to share content that is, as you said, as global as enough, but yet in the own language of the brand we're sharing. So if we're going to an event in Argentina, then we'll share this event obviously in Spanish, because we want to attract people who are either in Argentina or around and that can attend online. So whatever we would take, for example, for that event, the insights or the key takeaway usually would be the person that attended, and then we either reshare or we would ask them, can you give us, things that could apply for Latin America, but anyone in the world would be interested to know that these are the challenges or the opportunities in cross-border payment, in the cross-border payment industry in Latin America. So it still stays relevant enough on a global level. Yet, yes, it's a bit watered down, as you said.
No, I think it makes sense. I love that you're asking a question, how is it relevant to someone in Brazil, or how is it relevant to someone in Kenya? I don't think a lot of brands really ask themselves that question. They think, oh, it's relevant to Singapore, it's relevant to the US, that's enough for the global audience. So I love that you're asking yourself that question and saying either yes or no. Another thing that makes it really difficult, and I think it's easier for people like you and I who have lived around the world, is having an understanding of the global markets. Because, for example, if you're someone who's just born and raised in the US, once again, throwing Americans under the bus here, and you have never really traveled, or you've been one business trip to Europe, and you're having to do global marketing, at least on a social media platform, it's going to be really tough. It's going to be really, really tough. And I think that's one of the advantages that you have, is that you've lived in so many markets, you speak so many languages, you understand kind of the different cultural nuances. So you have, I would say, a slightly easier or slightly better grasp at doing that than someone who hasn't had that global experience, would you say?
Well, thank you. I take that as a compliment.
Yes, absolutely.
I agree, and you're the same, right? You've been traveling. You're living in Singapore for a few years now, and you understand that we always see the world in, obviously, in the environment we are in, but moving around and traveling gives you a complete new perspective and understanding. And also what it brings, I feel, is, as you said, the understanding of one thing in a country can mean a complete different thing in another country. So how do you make that content relevant, and how do you ensure that it's understood and not misinterpreted as well? So that's more for B2C, I feel, than really B2B.
Yeah.
B2B, we stay pretty vanilla
Yeah.
in terms of content, because it's really either data driven or industry driven. So even if we go a bit more on the side, the fun side, we're still stay very corporate and professional. And that's why it's good to have individual profiles to give more flavors to the company as well. But on a global point of view, for example, what I really like is when I see a company doing, one global campaign, and you see how they basically translate that into different markets, and not the translation, but in terms of how they move forward with the different formats and sometimes colors and way of positioning things. I feel that's very interesting in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think it's been a great conversation. Hopefully everyone's watching agrees. It's been a good debate. I think for me, learning the perspective from a company in terms of why they do things the way they do, particularly kind of creating that global content as we talked about. And I think we bring up some very good points at that the integration between, the company and the individual pages. I think those brands that do that effectively will really, grow both of their profiles efficiently. So those are some of the key takeaways that I had from today's session. So I've learned a lot as well. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all your questions, and also the fact that you're bringing a very different perspective and very good points that sometimes I don't articulate myself, but you're bringing them. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. My pleasure. Thank you so much, Amelie. Really appreciate it. And if you're watching today's show, let us know in the comments, what do you think? Company versus individual or integration, like we talked about. We'd love to get your guys' thoughts as well. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much again, Amelie. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.